Good afternoon, everybody. This is Dr. Serge, and welcome to another episode of Search for the Truth. And my goal with this podcast is to, empower people with knowledge so we can, take in charge our health and get better naturally. And today I'm really excited to have my following guest, Mrs. Mary. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Dr. Serge. It's a pleasure to be here today.
Awesome. So today we're going to talk about how inflammation fuels diseases and aging. If you guys have any questions for her, please write it in the chat section so I can ask her so we can talk about whatever question you may have. So first of all, can you tell us a little bit about you, uh, why you're so passionate to help people, and specifically with this topic of inflammation?
Well, that's a great question. It actually started when I was very young. I had a lot of health issues, Dr. Serge. I really was struggling with all kinds of things from chronic pain. This was as a young adult even, and chronic pain, fatigue. I had just a whole host of things going on hormonally that were just really dysfunctional, I guess. And I went from doctor to doctor and just never really found answers. I went through the conventional medicine, hamster wheel of just going from place to place, and they'd recommend medications, and I just would never really resolve anything.
Yeah.
So I realized that if I wanted to feel well and get better, I needed to take matters into my own hands. So I did a lot of research on my own, and my trade is I'm a physical therapist trained, and it's pretty strong background in biology. It's my undergraduate. So I kind of was already looking for answers all along. And then I just happened to come upon looking into functional medicine. I also looked into nutrition and wellness coaching. And I also just did my own studies trying to figure out what the relationship of emotional stress and trauma and unresolved stress was. It impacted the body in different ways. And I came upon a study that was done in 1980s that was called the ACE study, the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study. And that really opened my eyes to the fact that a lot of symptoms, true physical symptoms, are sometimes caused from unresolved stress when there's no other reasons that can be found and there's no other answers that are, really helping. So that's kind of what led me on my quest. And I delved into the whole thing with eyes wide open, knowing that there was this emotional component, which was driving inflammation, which stress does do that to our body. But also I was not really paying attention to my nutrition and my self-care. And so those things had to really take a front seat again. They never had. So I really had to learn ways of putting my diet first and foremost, learning about nutrition and how it impacted inflammation in the body. And most diseases are as a result of chronic silent inflammation that really kind of goes unnoticed and undetected for many, many years sometimes before it actually surfaces as a disease, so to speak. So a lot of times this just, people don't know that they're inflamed, and they don't know they can't help themselves if they don't understand it.
And you're right. I'm really glad that you mentioned that inflammation is a silent condition because sometimes we don't really know the body's inflamed. And a little while ago, I was shocked to read this statistic that I think the author said that about 70% of chronic issues come from unresolved stress or traumas from the past and so on. So I was a bit surprised by this. But on the other side, it makes sense.
Yes. Yes.
So let's start basic. So what is inflammation as it is? Because we talk a lot about it, but what I realized over the years that a lot of people don't really fully understand what is inflammation. Inflammation may not be a bad thing until
Right.
it becomes chronic, right? So what is inflammation?
So inflammation, we really do have to understand what it is in order really to change it, right?
Yeah.
So inflammation is actually a very natural response to a tissue injury or any sort of insult to the body. And normally the body responds characteristically with redness, swelling, pain in the area. An example would be an acute inflammation of a sprained ankle, for example. The swelling and the redness, we all know what that kind of looks like and feels like, at least I do. So anyhow, that is acute inflammation. Now,
Yeah.
inflammation does have a dark side. This is what we're talking about, okay? The dark side is the fact that it is silent. It could be going on in our body, very low grade, affecting all of our bodily cells, all of our functions of all of our organ systems. and we wouldn't really know it. And again, it's this smoldering fire inside of us that just kind of slowly ages our cells. It upsets a lot of the balance in our body, the homeostasis of our body that we're naturally supposed to be in balance for. And that would just sets the stage for disease states. And so, yes, probably 70 to 80% of a lot of the chronic diseases that we consider of aging, such as cardiovascular disease, are a result of this silent inflammation in the body. And even just things that we think of every day, like joint pain. If somebody comes into my clinic and they have a lot of joint pain and they have a lot of muscle pain and they have maybe diabetes or they have, whatever, high blood pressure, those are red flags for me. There's inflammation going on in the body. And those are just signals that we don't pay attention to. We think, oh, I'm just getting older, or I did something wrong, or, we don't really look at how our choices and the things that we're doing every single day in our lives are impacting that level of inflammation in the body that eventually kind of leads to our disease.
So almost every week, I would say almost every day, I had people telling me, I'm just getting older. That's normal. I have aches and pains. I have high blood pressure, and that's just life. So how do you respond to this?
Well, sometimes, the body does age differently for other people. For everybody is different. And so everybody has, a certain genetic predisposition to things. And I don't want to discount that. I mean, we all have a genetic inheritance.
Yeah.
And again, what I look at like more is what can I control? So the epigenetics, which is what happens to our genes when it's exposed to our lifestyle, our diet, our stress levels. That's how our genes are expressed through this mechanism where our genes now meet our environment and what we're doing, and that's how they are expressed. And again, nobody lives a completely perfect life where they're always doing the right thing every single day, but we can use what we know to make a change. And I think we can control what we can. That's really what it is. And everybody does age differently. I mean, there are people that do everything right and still, end up with a lot of different conditions.
You're right. You're right. So what are the main drivers of inflammation from, based on your experience? What drives inflammation?
So, there's a lot of things that do, but I'm going to talk about three primary ones. The three primary ones are that we know of are nutrition. We know that the standard American diet, which I kind of refer to as SAD, is really woefully lacking in nutrients. It's very high in processed foods. Probably 70% of the standard American diet is processed foods. It's very high in sugar. It's very high in simple carbohydrates like flours. And what that does, those are all pro-inflammatory foods. Things like alcohol, even gluten. Those are all very pro-inflammatory foods that just adds to that inflammation in the body. Okay, so it stirs up the inflammatory cytokines in the body that will damage the cells, create free radicals and things like that. So diet is huge. I think diet has to be probably the number one reason why we have a lot of inflammation. And our diets have changed over the years. Our agriculture practices have changed. So the way we're growing our food and distributing our food has changed. And that all impacts how the food impacts us. And so again, it's food is a huge, huge thing that I always have to discuss with people. It's never an easy topic to discuss because nobody likes to change their diet. We love what we love, and we get in habits, whatever they may be. The second thing is probably the stress. I have to, again, go back to the stress being a huge factor because, again, the stress that is ongoing. I mean, we all experience acute stress, but the stress that I'm referring to here are the chronic stressors that are unresolved, that we don't have a good way of managing, or maybe we're not even aware of it. They may be unconscious thoughts or beliefs. They could be things like, the brain, which is interesting, doesn't really distinguish between something that happened 20 or 30 years ago and something that you're thinking about now that you're worrying about, that's ruminating over in your mind. So your perception of your reality is key. So if your perception of your reality is based on a faulty belief system that you picked up years ago from a bad experience or a trauma that you had, again, those are going to be dictating your decisions and your choices. And it's going to also be dictating how you treat yourself, how you're eating, if you're taking care of yourself, if you're doing that self-care, and managing your stress when it happens, taking care of those things. So when we don't do that, we tend to put our bodies in a state where we have a muscle constriction, we have tight muscles, we have a restriction of our blood flow, our blood vessels constrict. That can cause high blood pressure, cardiovascular problems. Our digestive system slows down. We impair our digestion when we're stressed out. Again, when we're under stress and our body's, putting out these chemicals like cortisol, that basically raises our blood sugar. So we might get sugar metabolism dysregulation. Your hormones are affected. So everything in the body, every single system of the body is subject to that stress physiology, those stress chemicals that are circulating in the body. The third one I would say probably is our lack of movement. Exercise is really has multiple benefits, but it lowers our inflammation. It keeps our muscles strong, our bones strong. It also helps us cope with stress. It helps us to maybe kind of get rid of some of that excess energy or maybe frustration that we might have if we're out doing an exercise and enjoying a particular activity. So I think exercise is really key too. We really need to keep our bodies strong. We need to keep those little cells in our body that generate energy for us, called mitochondria, very healthy. The mitochondria are basically what drive every system in our body. They create our energy, our ATP energy from the foods we eat. And if we don't exercise, they become a little bit unhealthy. So we need to exercise to keep those healthy and happy. Exercise just has a multitude of benefits for the entire body, and it just overall lowers inflammation and kind of slows down the aging clock.
These are really good points, and I agree with you because I see that with clients. It's unbelievable how people are not active, for example, or they are confused about what they eat, right? There's so much confusion on that. So from your experience, what is the basic diet that you recommend or lifestyle to people when it comes to diet, to foods?
So I think that everybody's food is different. I mean, everybody has a different body, a unique composition. So one person's food can be another person's poison. It can be very, very unique. So
Yeah.
I think the future of medicine needs to be tailored towards our genetics. I think it really needs to look at, okay, what is in your genes and what does your body need? Mine might be different than yours and everybody else's. So we need to look at that. But to start with, because we don't necessarily have access to that right away, and a lot of people can, but they don't, is to just start with a crowding out, I call it. And that means adding in or front loading all of the healthy foods and then little by little eliminating those foods that you know are pro-inflammatory. Such things as flour, sugar, gluten, alcohol. All of those things are very pro-inflammatory. These seed oils, like, the high omega-6 oils, are very inflammatory. And that's in all processed foods pretty much. So if you can just start by front loading the healthy stuff, like, for example, having probably a 60 to 70% front load of vegetables and fruits, plant-based foods, which have a lot of different micronutrients in there that our bodies needs to fight aging. Antioxidants, phytochemicals that our bodies need to fight that aging process and the free radicals. And then also just adding in, some very good, lean, healthy protein sources like, salmon is high in omega-3. Not everybody likes salmon, but again, there's a lot of foods out there that are very healthy, lean sources of protein that can be very helpful. And then I guess just, probably then making sure you're getting enough healthy fats in your diet as well. And the healthy fats are, your olive oil, avocado oil, things of that nature, and eliminating the seed oils because they tend to be more inflammatory. So I guess just starting out by knowing what you need to avoid and trying your best to try to limit the amount of those foods that you eat by front loading the healthier foods. And that will appease your appetite and satiety so that you don't really crave a lot of those other foods. Little by little, your body's cravings will change especially when you start eliminating sugar, because sugar is highly inflammatory and highly addictive. So once you can start overcoming some of those habits of just choosing those types of foods, little by little, your body is going to reward you by feeling better and having more energy and things like that.
And like you said earlier, we don't have to be 100% perfect with the diet. It's slowly making changes and moving forward. Because a lot of people sometimes get confused or upset when it comes to the diet. They don't want to change, or it's hard to change. One thing at a time.
One thing at a time. Small little changes, a little adds up to a lot over time. So yeah,
Yeah,
small changes always work better, because if you try to massively change right away, it doesn't work.
it doesn't work. You're right. People fail when they do that, and they get frustrated and upset.
Yes.
What about coffee?
Coffee? Well, I mean, I'm not a big coffee drinker. I will be honest with you. I found early on that my body, again, particularly, doesn't enjoy coffee. I mean,
I
I like it. Don't get me wrong,
Yes, yes.
but it's not. It didn't really. I had a lot of digestive problems, like I told you. I was working through so many different issues
Yeah,
physically, that I learned that there's certain foods that just don't like me. So I just avoid them. And again, that's the science of individual N of one, if you will, science, where you can decide for yourself by eliminating certain foods from your diet for a period of time, say maybe 3 months. See how you feel. Do you feel a change? Do you feel a difference? And that was one thing I did have to eliminate, is because when I do drink coffee, I don't feel well. Some people may not have the same experience.
you're right. It's really individualized when it comes to diet and what you drink, what you put in your mouth, in your body, like you said. So you talk about the gut. And until recently, we were not quite aware of this gut brain and immune system connection, right? So we know more and more today, but can you describe us a little bit how the gut can really help inflammation throughout the whole body?
Yes, that's a really excellent question. The gut, in other fields, they call the gut is like the seat of the disease. It's all health begins in the gut and death begins in the colon. So
Yeah,
essentially, the gut is the way we take in our nutrients and our food. We take it in from the outside into the inside. So there has to be a barrier function in the gut. That means that the gut has to digest the food, hold it inside until it's ready to be released into the bloodstream as nutrients. Oftentimes, when we have a lot of inflammation in the body due to our diet, processed foods, stress levels can impact the gut. So basically, a lot of these things impact the gut by compromising, or I guess just eliminating that barrier function. And we get something called leaky gut. The gut cell, it's only like a one cell layer thick membrane that separates the outside from the inside. So when we're taking in foods that kind of destroy that barrier function, we get this leaky gut. And what ends up happening is that the undigested food, proteins that are highly antigenic, they can create a lot of immune responses, get released into the bloodstream. And then also you can get bacteria and viruses and other undesirables that get into the bloodstream and elicit this immune reaction, where the body goes into full alarm. And again, you can get symptoms as far as the brain, because the gut and the brain are highly connected. We call the gut the second brain, the enteric nervous system, because it's highly innervated. And it is where we produce a lot of our neurotransmitters, a lot of our vitamins. So again, these types of things affect the entire body, because when the gut is compromised, you're not going to be producing those vitamins and those neurotransmitters. 70% of your serotonin, for example, is in the gut, produced there. So if things are out of balance in the gut, they're going to be out of balance pretty much everywhere else. I think it's safe to say. And the gut and the brain are so closely connected that your psychological state can affect the gut, and vice versa. Like if you're taking in foods that are highly inflammatory, processed foods, they affect your mood. If you're eating a lot of sugar, you're going to get a lot of mood changes. Gluten, for example, is a highly inflammatory protein that is not only damaging for people that have celiac disease, which is an autoimmune condition, but it also is damaging to the common person. I think it was Dr. Alessio Fasano from Harvard that had suggested that everybody that eats gluten tends to release zonulin, which is a compound that opens up the tight junctions of the gut and causes leaky gut. So it kind of suggests that perhaps we shouldn't be eating as much gluten as we are. And because again, it is highly inflammatory and it can have far-reaching effects to the brain.
Really good point there. I agree with you as well. So clinically, when people tend to eat a lot of gluten, they tend to have different symptoms, not just gastrointestinal symptoms, but it could be neurological or inflammation like you're talking about. We talk about the physical body, the physical gut, but you mentioned earlier that the stress or traumas can actually lead to pains and diseases. So what's the relationship there?
So between trauma and inflammation or pain?
Correct. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So yes, that's really a very strong connection. So stress, it definitely it turns on the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis, and that again that you're going to get a secretion of a lot of stress type hormones in the body, cortisol, adrenaline. The body's going to go into a fight or flight response. So the autonomic nervous system consists of two branches: the sympathetic nervous system, which is our fight, flight, or freeze. Freeze is when we tend to collapse and we just really can't do anything. Fight and fright is, we know what that is. We tense up, our muscles get tight, and we all know what that feels like.
Yeah.
Again, we could be in a state of sympathetic dominance, or our sympathetic nervous system is running the show 24/7 and not realize it sometimes. I became very accustomed to my own sympathetic drive where it seemed normal to me. Like I didn't know what it felt like to go into the other nervous system, which was my parasympathetic, because I just never learned that. So that was something that I had to really reprogram in the brain. So when you're under stress and you're in that sympathetic response, that hyperarousal state, besides all of the stress chemicals that are being released into the body, causing their damaging effects, it's affecting, again, it's putting out these inflammatory cytokines, which can have really far-reaching pain effects throughout the entire body. When you have a stressful event in your life, say you had, let's go back to the ACE study, the Adverse Childhood Experience study. Children that had more than one, say, for example, more than one, I think it was in women that they found any more than one ACE point was correlated with joint pain and inflammation in autoimmune type disorders. I think it was like for every one increase of ACE score of 1, they had a 20% increase. So if somebody with an ACE score of 3 had a 60% increase in autoimmune disorders.
Yeah.
That's in women. There was a similar finding in men, but not quite as strong of a correlation. But just having those adverse childhood experiences kind of changes the nervous system to an extent where it imprints in the brain, in the pain center of the brain, the emotional center of the brain, which is the same thing essentially. That hyper awareness or hypervigilance, and again, it's something that's programmed, and because the nervous system is neuroplastic, we can reprogram it. It's not like, oh my gosh, I had this trauma in my life and I had this terrible childhood and now I have to deal with pain and inflammation. It doesn't have to be that way. There's all sorts of ways, and I know you know of many, that we can retrain the body, the brain, to reprocess, reframe, change perceptions, change responses to that event. And a lot of times people don't even know it's there. They've denied it. They've said, oh, I'm fine. I'm dealing with things okay. And they're really not, and when you really drill down, you get to the point where you find out that these events are still significantly impacting them from a physical standpoint, physical pain. There is a organization, I'm sure you may have heard of them, is the Psychophysiological Disorders Association, the PPDA. They're a nonprofit that is working with health professionals to increase the awareness of these ACEs, these adverse childhood experiences, and this unresolved stress and its impact on pain in the body. And what they always advocate is that if you run tests and you have all these different tests done and they're all coming up inconclusive or not really just, giving you a strong sense of reason for the person's discomfort or pain, you have to kind of look down into their stress levels. You have to kind of look at, are they experiencing stress now? Did they have a very stressful event early on that is impacting them now? And so they're teaching health professionals to ask these types of questions in a very compassionate way to find out what might be affecting them now. And I think we're missing the boat if we don't do that, because a lot of people are walking around right now with these types of conditions where tests have been inconclusive or negative. They've had surgeries to take care of the pain. They're still in pain. They're just continuing on. If we don't understand the impact that this has, we're going to miss helping a lot of people. We're going to miss really trying to get to the root cause of the problem.
I totally agree with you. Years and years ago, actually, I was dealing with a chronic foot pain. and nobody could figure out. I mean, doctors after doctors, everything was fine. They cannot find anything. And somebody mentioned it must be a mental psychological issue. And it turns out that I had some unresolved issues from my maternal side. And then when I addressed those issues, pain went away. Like it went away like within a few minutes. It was unbelievable. And years of pain disappeared in a few minutes. So everything is possible.
Yes.
It's
And I think
amazing.
that, yeah, when we recognize, and,
Yeah,
if we can just become more self-aware,
yeah,
and sometimes it's not even just self-awareness, because a lot of people, these are unconscious things. And we know 95% of our behaviors are subconscious driven. They're driven by our programs, that we've gotten over the years. And so sometimes we need help from a professional to really get down there and figure out what we can do to bring them up to the front, kind of be compassionate with them and let them come into the foreground and then deal with them. And a lot of times, once we do that, it's amazing what can be released. I mean, as far as pain, and various conditions that are just kind of like ongoing chronic conditions that we've been dealing with for a really, really long time.
exactly. So, what are some simple ways that people can do to lower their rate of inflammation and the stress in the body?
So again, we're going to go back to the causes of inflammation and then just trying to kind of reverse those things. So we know what causes inflammation. We've talked about the stress. We've talked about the diet. So one of the things, the primary ways that I teach people to deal with inflammation, or at least to get it under some sort of a manageable control, is starting with nutrition. Again, looking at what their diet looks like, and they have to be very honest. I can make them keep a journal for at least a week.
Yeah.
Write down everything you're eating, and then write down whether or not you're actually hungry, or what emotion you're feeling when you're eating it. So when we uncover a lot of those habits, those eating habits, we try to piece by piece, just very small steps, one step at a time, trying to, again, replace those foods that we know are pro-inflammatory for them. Maybe put them on a modified elimination diet for a period of time to see what works for them. Certainly, if they're willing to do some type of a nutrition testing or genetic testing, that would be something that I would recommend as well. Because again, we can be eating a food that we think is healthy, and if it doesn't agree with our biology, we can be creating inflammation in the gut. And that again leads to leaky gut and changes in the microbiome, which is our gut flora, and on and on. So I think that nutrition has to be the first step. Okay, then I talk to them about stress. I always need to talk to them about what stress are you currently having? And then if that leads me nowhere, then little by little, maybe not the first or second session, but eventually I'm going to get to talking to them about other things, like maybe in the past that they might still be unresolved. So dealing with the stress and then teaching them ways to narrate their story. For again, their perception of their story is a lot of times what really leads to the mental angst and to the whatever anxiety they're having. So if they could reframe it somehow, and we usually do that with maybe journaling, maybe start doing a lot of writing. Writing is sometimes a way that we can really express ourselves in a way that we don't normally express ourselves. So we would just write, and whatever comes out is usually somewhat of a sign of what we need to work on or what we need to deal with. And we start there. So journaling, and then being just a little bit more compassionate with themselves, showing themselves some love in the way that they take care of themselves. So are they getting enough sleep? Are they having enough downtime, relaxation time? This was a big one for me. I felt like if I was not doing something every minute of the day, that I just wasn't accomplishing, it wasn't good. So understanding that the body needs downtime and adequate rest, adequate sleep, addressing sleep issues if they are a problem, because sleep is a big part of healing. It's a big part of reducing that inflammation. So again, we need to get that under management, and maybe doing whatever they need to do to just respond rather than react to their life, and just whatever that takes. And sometimes it's just self-compassion, being with the emotions, being with the feelings as they arise, welcoming them in, not judging, not criticizing. Again, this voice in our head is always somewhat critical. We have to try to really retrain that and try to just teach them ways to manage that stress. And then last would be probably the exercise piece, movement, trying to make it as enjoyable as possible, not feeling like not everybody's a gym person. Not everybody likes to go lift weights. So figuring out what might be pleasurable for them, that they can get moving at least 30 to 60 minutes per day, whether it's just be riding their bike, walking their dog, maybe doing some yoga. It varies for every person. So you have to kind of start where you're starting, start where they are, and begin where they can begin and where they feel comfortable beginning when they're ready to make that change. And again, a lot of people have different readiness points. So you have to just kind of tap into, are they ready for this?
Exactly. You have to meet them where they are.
Yeah.
So good advice, actually. So you wrote a book.
Yes.
Can you tell us a bit about the book and where we can get it?
Yeah. So the book is called Staying Healthy, Living Longer. It was released this March, and it was an Amazon bestseller, and I've gotten 2 book awards so far on it. And I wrote the book. I had many years that I wanted to write the book. I just wanted to get the information to people so that they would have a way of understanding how to put this all together and give them hope, because that was one thing I was feeling lack of when I was going through this whole thing, is a lack of hope. And I needed to write some stuff down, and I wanted to get people to understand what they can do, very simply, what they can do to help themselves. It's available on Amazon. It's available at Barnes & Noble. It's through indie authors, so it's available wherever books are sold, actually. So
awesome. And how can we reach out to you if our listeners have any questions or need any advice or help from you?
Well, they can email me, or they could reach me through my website. My website is my name, Mary Dicaro, MD Therapy, THERAPY and wellness.com. MD Therapy and wellness.com.
Actually, I put your information below the video. So if you go to the section of the description of the video, you're going to find her Facebook, her email, her website, and so on and so on. So don't hesitate to reach out to her, because she knows everything when it comes to inflammation, and she can help you. So Mary, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate this conversation. It was really neat. I hope to talk to you again. Happy Thanksgiving to you and your family, and happy Thanksgiving to all of you guys.
Yes, happy Thanksgiving to everybody. Thank you, Serge. It was a pleasure being on your show. I really appreciate the opportunity. Happy Thanksgiving.
Thank you.